So when you start your LOD, it's good to kind of set some goals here to begin with. And for my first LOD here, I'm going to go more aggressive and say, let's aim for about a 50% reduction. So that's going to be bringing our try count down to about 3.45 if possible. The way we're going to start this is we'll go ahead and just take our hero LOD here and duplicate it. With the LOD1 naming convention, we're already good to go. Now, you could either hit Control-H to hide this, or you can toggle between these, whichever one you prefer. But let's go ahead and start off with this. Now, the next thing I like to have open is my UV menu. I'm going to just minimize this or set it off to the side. But with the UV menu active, the main thing I want to have is these borders showing here. That's this toggle here. To make it a little bit easier to read so we don't have all the color information, I can set this here. So now we're just getting the white borders. The white borders are areas we do not want to touch, if possible. Now, the next thing is to explore some different tools. One of the tools that's very useful is the collapse edge tool. So on these edges here on this axe, which I can work symmetrically, but notice I can't use symmetry on because it's not down the center line, I can come up here and we can do an edit mesh collapse here. And what that will do is it will collapse and merge these vertices down. I can do that wherever pertinent. Unfortunately, on this axe, that's probably the only area. The other tool that's very useful here is the target weld. I can use the target weld here to weld these specific vertices back to where they need to go without disturbing their placement. Notice that the collapse actually moves them to the center. Now that brings up an interesting point. For example, at this level of detail, this line here that we have, we very likely could come in and we could collapse this running all the way across, and we could save ourselves a lot of time in welding these vertices. And what you want to do on your initial pass here is you just kind of want to take off an initial level of detail. So that way, as it goes away at a distance, it just feels natural. So anything that is going to just make a minor change to the silhouette, that's going to be what we're kind of aiming for. Now on the axe blade though, I may actually need to keep some of those ones I kept in here. You'll notice it actually still holds up pretty decently from this distance, needing that extra roundness. So I am going to backtrack here and I'm going to undo that. It's also not a bad idea to potentially set up a camera at the distance you want to see this from. So that's something to be aware of. You could work split screen here, and you could just set a camera to kind of be that way. For example, the front view. If I go ahead and turn off X-ray mode, it's interesting that was on. You know, let's say this is the distance we want to have this at. You could kind of keep that there at a smaller size. So as you're working here, you can kind of track the changes. So unfortunately with the axe, I am going to actually end up keeping those, which is interesting. But I believe these ones we can collapse because they're not making a huge impact on the silhouette from a distance. So if we go ahead and take a look at these, we'll select them all. And we can do a edit mesh collapse here. And you'll see in that view, we don't really see a difference. Now, the other area we can generally do with circular structures is we can go ahead and kind of remove some of the roundness. If I go ahead and double click these edges, for example, these run all the way up and through to the top here. I could do the same going around here, basically selecting anything that's not structurally required. So those ones are structurally required, for example, and that one has a UV, but you know, these ones don't. I could do an edit mesh delete edge and vertex on these now to remove those to kind of get those in place. The other thing I could consider is instead of deleting the edge and vertex here, I could take these side ones and I could collapse them on this one here and see if we can't get away with that all the way up to here. So we could do an edit mesh collapse. And I think that'll be a better solution than deleting those by themselves, because we do want to keep this uniformly, and structurally speaking, the axe only needs them coming up into here. So this will allow us to reduce the roundness here without distorting things. Now, one of the other reasons I encourage you to do a manual reduction at this stage is so you can understand how your modeling decisions previously and your retopology decisions may impact how successfully you can reduce a mesh. When you just rely on automated methods all the time, you don't really learn that firsthand, so it's something to kind of be mindful of. But something like that does quite a bit of reduction on the axe base there, and we can actually repeat the process up here too, just kind of the same way. I'll come in here and collapse those ones, find my center line, and then the two adjacents. We could come in here and collapse these ones. And then as far as the actual axe goes, we could experiment with, removing an edge there. But I think at the distance that's at, I'm going to keep this. Now, another thing we can consider is just welding some of these areas we don't necessarily need, like this here to here and even to here. You'll notice there's a little bit of a distortion there on the texture. That's okay. It's going to be impossible to detect that at the distance. That, however, had some weirdness on the normal. Sometimes the vertex you weld these to, the side, affects what the results are for the normal, so just kind of be mindful of that. But that's why I want to have the normal map on here in my texture, so when I see that, I can basically go the other direction. On the end caps, we can do something similar, where basically we weld these over to a corner. And as long as we don't get a weird result like that, we'll be good. It's giving me a weird result, so I'm probably going to leave that be. But there we go. I could also reduce the center line more than likely, as long as this isn't going to throw a weird fit on me and give me weird distorted normals, we should be good. Sometimes it's also a matter of how many welds is required to make these work. We could take these, which is kind of interesting, and weld these into each other. And you'll see how that starts to get a little bit tricky there, but absolutely does the trick. This edge here is looking a little funky, though. I'm curious if that had to do with that center line or not. Okay, it didn't. It has to do with the collapsed edge. But remember, it's about the distance we're seeing at. It's going to look really weird and wonky up close when you're doing a manual edit like this, but from a distance, it's going to look okay. And that's why I have my other camera out there, is so I can comfort myself and reassure myself that I'm not destroying my model. I am simply adding more utility to it. So let me continue doing this on the backside here, and then fortunately on the character we should be able to use symmetry. On this side we're not so lucky, so I will just kind of deal with it and call that good for now on the axe. So if we go ahead and take a look at this now, that is our axe here. And we haven't reduced this by much, unfortunately. That's part of the process, but we still brought it down quite a bit. So we're at 6824, so we still kind of brought it down a bit. If we compare that to the first one here, which if I unhide that, you'll see that we reduced it by about 160. So it's a good start. So we're going to be calling that good for the axe. What we need to do now is head over here to the head, and I'll go ahead and start out with the helmet here, and I'll just go ahead and isolate this. Now, like I mentioned, we should be able to utilize something like the World X on this, and to be able to select this, symmetrically. Now, this one's a lot more complicated. We have a very dense mesh, but we can start out with the areas we know we can get away with. For example, the interior of the helmet here, we probably don't even need this high to begin with, so there's a good chance we could just come in here and edit this. So I'm going to start with that top part, and I'm just going to delete edge and vertex there on that very top area. And then when it comes to these individual areas in here, I'll just start welding these in to make an even more reduced mesh here. So that way we have really not a whole lot going on in here at all. When it comes to this inner ring here, this one, once again, doesn't really matter too much, so I should be able to just kind of double click here and do an edit mesh collapse. I am going to leave those be, though. I don't want to disturb those. And I could even consider doing something like that around here, kind of collapsing this as well. But I think I'll leave that be for now, and we'll call that good on the interior for the moment. On the exterior here, we can start to work on some of these areas. These rounded edges, for example, these are probably not visible anymore. So we could either try double-clicking these and doing a edit mesh delete edge and vertex to see how that impacts things, or using various collapsing techniques. It kind of just depends on how we've tied them into here. But I think that'll be fine. With the corners, this is going to be a little bit more complicated. So I'll come in with my target weld here and kind of weld these down. And the outer corners of these I might have to keep put. So that's something to kind of be aware of. We might not be able to really do much there. We can check, and it just depends on how much that's impacting the silhouette. So I think the roundness of these have to stay. One thing we might be able to get rid of is, remember this line we added to kind of reduce the normal information? Well, at this distance, if we delete this edge, we can see if that has any impact. And you notice it had a pretty big impact here, but it doesn't really out there, and that's something to be aware of. I might want to undo the change and just kind of compare. You can even duplicate the mesh over if you needed to kind of cross-compare. So one with the line in place, and then we could come in and do one without it. So I'll delete edge and vertex there. And if we compare those two, they look identical, so we'll go with the one that has the reduction. Now, as far as a lot of this stuff goes, we can start to reduce out the roundness, and depending on how we want to do it, you know, these edges here, they're not connecting into anything important. I could do a delete edge and vertex on these and clear those out, no problem. Didn't make a huge distortion, so there's nothing wrong with that. We can proceed to do this across the board here with any edges that structurally don't have anything super important going on. So, for example, that one there, we can definitely ixnay. And we can repeat the process basically around the helmet here with any of these that we don't seem to need a home for. So just kind of be mindful of that. I'll start with that one. And then something like this here, you know, this is an opportunity here where I don't see why we couldn't just double click these, do an edit mesh collapse to collapse those. And as long as it's holding up, we should be okay. This outer ring that I have running around here, we probably don't need. I don't even know if we needed it to begin with. We do kind of need it for this, though, so I don't know if there's any way I can get around that. Ironically, maybe if I weld that lower area and this lower area, so we're keeping the outer highlight, we could get that going there, but there's a good chance we don't need this edge. There's a good chance we actually didn't need this edge anyway for the game asset, so that's also something to kind of be mindful of. Is I don't know if it actually structurally served a purpose to begin with, but something like that can be kind of a scary edit to make. It's definitely kind of a point of no return, but we can see how that impacts things here. Another thing is this slight change between these 2 points. We also don't necessarily need. That's where things get really weird, but something that small at a distance, the normal map's going to carry over for. And since we did that there, as you might be able to guess, we could do it here too, to basically remove that. All right, as far as these ones go, we do need to have some of these going on the round, but we could probably have half as many, especially since we cut out everything else there. That one's essential on the bottom, so I'll keep that and just delete this one. And it's still holding up okay from that distance. And then as we come around here, I can go ahead and continue to utilize things like the edit mesh collapse to collapse those. And we can start working into this upper area here in terms of the horn and head. Some of these we might need to keep, but we could still do reductions on. For example, in the center line, I need those 2 running up, but I don't necessarily need these 2 on the visor. So those could be ixnayed. And then this kind of reveals the lack of necessity for at least one of these. So I could take that and delete the edge and vertex there. So we still have the roundness, but we don't necessarily need all the info. And then when it comes to the horns are a little bit challenging. They're just like any other center or any other cylinder. So we want to keep the 2 center lines basically undisturbed right here and here. But running down the sides, we could straight up delete these if it's possible. It's not always possible, but if it's possible. This is an example of where it might not be. That's actually tied into something like this pole here. But as a solution, what I could do is basically collapse along the sides here. So I could take this entire row here, for example, top to bottom, and I could collapse these without leaving the horn shape, and then we could resolve it onto the helm later. So I'm basically going to collapse that side. Sometimes it's easier to turn the textures off to kind of make these symmetrical. We'll go ahead and collapse this side. So let's go ahead and select these. And then once we have these in place, we can do an edit mesh and collapse to collapse these down, which will perform our first level of reduction. And then after that, we need to kind of pick a side area here. Now, like I mentioned, we generally want to keep 1 running through, but in this case, we have 2 running through. I could double click these and we can collapse these into making it 1 running through. So we'll just do an edit mesh collapse there, and that should give us a nice reduction on the horn. I don't necessarily want to go lower than that, but you know, that should hold up nicely from that distance. And then from here, we can continue the process of doing any sort of welding we'd like to do. That side area here, I feel like we're doing a bit too much reduction on, but I'm going to go with it for now. We can check those errors inside of our game engine. And if they're too bad, we could come back and we could correct them. I'm going to kind of just do an initial pass here to get us through this series, though. But, you know, my goal here is to give you the tools and knowledges you need. So if it's not perfect, that'll be okay. Not my goal in terms of what we're aiming for. All right, so from here, I'm just going to continue target welding back these edges here in the center. And one of the things we can check is whether or not the volume of this even is being seen from this distance. That's this lifted area across the helmet. And if I go ahead and flip this here, for example, into silhouette mode, it is lifted enough to warrant, so we'll keep that ledge in there, but in future ones we might not. The other thing is the roundness of this from a distance I may have messed up on. It's kind of hard with something complex like a helmet like this. And as a matter of fact, this is one of those situations where I may use some automated tools and not others. So the helmet here is not going to deform. It's an excellent example of where we could use an automated tool on a character. I'm going to delete edge and vertex here and then just target weld these in. Actually, I don't want to delete edge and vertex. Now that I'm looking at that, this looks like it'd be better for a collapse. So let me go ahead and bring these in. Now you do have to be careful. You see some of these faces look like they're getting deleted. They're not. I'm going to back out into here and just double click this in face mode again. It's kind of weird because, you know, we don't want to separate out our mesh if we can avoid it. But sometimes it's hard to kind of see what's going on here. So let me go ahead and collapse that. And then we get this weird doohickey here where I can go ahead and weld that. And then when it comes to some of these side ones here, kind of the same song and dance of just collapsing, like here to here. We can do an edit mesh collapse. And then here to here, we can definitely do an edit mesh collapse. So something like that. And one of the things that you might be laughing at is, hey, what about the topology? Yeah, what about it? I'm noticing this area is getting really distorted here. I'm curious when that happened. It may already be the point of no return for us on that, and it is. So this is an example of where we do have to be very careful. There's a very good chance that that splotchiness is going to show up at a distance. There's a chance it won't, so yeah, there's that. If needed, we could come in and we could edit the UVs to accommodate that, which is another thing to be aware of. All of these basically end up with their own UV sets and geometry sets. They just share a material, generally speaking. So if we need to on an LOD, we can adjust the UVs. So I am going a bit aggressive here for this level, but sometimes it's necessary. So I'll go ahead and get these kind of set. And then even in these areas here now, I can start to look at where I can distribute some of those vertices because they just don't need to be connected there to that extent. All right, so this ledge I probably don't need since I'm just trying to maintain those corners. And then once again on the interior here, there's probably a lot of these that I don't need. So we can edit mesh collapse these. And then coming off of here now that I have all of those collapsed, I can probably collapse this further. I might leave that be though. The distortion here is pretty strong. And then just like I did on the front, I can probably take these on a back here and just kind of weld those down. And that's a pretty aggressive reduction. And now at this point, you can see we're already down to 5,556. So we've gotten this down by over 1,000 now, which is really great. And that's kind of our goal. I'll go ahead and save this out. So that way we don't lose any progress. And we can go ahead and move into the next areas here. Now, I'll go ahead and start out with the shoulders because they're going to be a little bit easier than something like the torso. With the shoulders here, we have to see what's important. One of the things I'm noticing is we don't really see the ledge here anymore between these. So this is where I would come in and just kind of weld these across here. This does break my rule a little bit of UV edges. Actually, it doesn't because we didn't put a UV edge here. So, hey, that's something I wanted to call out. Remember, you know, you're kind of observing where these changes are impacted by your modeling decisions, because we don't have a UV edge there, we can reduce this down a little bit easier. I am noticing, unfortunately, there's an issue there with my texture map. It looks like that might have something to do with the AO. I'll have to see about fixing that later, but that's a problem for future me if I still remember it. All right. So something like that, helps reduce this by a lot. And then interior, exterior is probably going to be one of the biggest things with this particular part. We don't necessarily need all of these running on the sides for this far away shot. I still think we do need to keep most of these, though, in terms of our edges in general. On the interior here, I'm pretty sure we can collapse this one, though. Maybe not. That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. The collapse had a bigger impact than I anticipated on that. Normally, I would expect something kind of like that. I'm actually going to weld these inward, too, to make more sense of them. I prefer to weld inwards towards holding areas than outwards, if possible. Something like this. I might even take that all the way in there. This also has some weirdness, so that's indicating to me that I didn't have something toggled when I hit bake. Just kind of a heads up. I could do the same thing here with these. We don't necessarily need the additional roundness this affords us on those areas. And then with the shoulders themselves, we kept ours kind of sparse. I probably should have had more to these. There is a chance we could weld this weld up here and still have a good shoulder shape from a distance. And even the top here, down to here. So that's something we can kind of look for. Notice that's distorting the volume, though. So due to the distortion of volume on that one, I'm going to leave it put and just going to do that one. I don't think we need to reduce from the sides at all. I think those are pretty scarce already, so we'll keep it that way. And that's an interesting thing. The shoulders are probably an area I could have done more on in terms of adding detail. When it comes to the legs, I usually do a 1x1 reduction if possible, just kind of taking one edge at a time off of here. I don't think that's going to be appropriate because, once again, this character is pretty scarce. But we can take areas like this and do a delete edge and vertex here. Maybe other areas like this. Any area where, we need the form, but we don't necessarily need the distortion. The boots there, that'll be fine. Even here on the end of the boot, I can probably come in with my edge here and target weld these together. So that way they hold up. And that should be fine. I think the rest of the boot stuff we need in for functionality. I do, however, feel that we don't necessarily need one of these lines. So this is where I could consider, welding this one over potentially. But we do kind of need that center line for movement purposes, so I'll keep it there. When it comes to these, we need the knee line, but we probably don't need these two lines, and we probably don't need those two either. So I'll come around here and I'll collapse this one. Ironically, we're going to keep this because this saves us vertices due to how they can converge, but we could probably get away with the target weld here, just kind of welding that to one of the sides, assuming there's not a whole lot of distortion. I'll do it to the back side since the front side's probably more important. And once again, I'm seeing these lines here. That's due to the baking process. I could actually queue this up here since we have this set. When I went to bake mesh maps on this here, the problem was I made it so that the curvature can overlap and maybe even the AO. So if we come into the curvature here, this is probably where the offender is. You'll see here self-intersect set to always. It should be to only say mesh. And if I go ahead and do that, it should fix it. And I can double check that for the body as well and just rebake these while this goes and re-export them. So nice thing is sometimes we catch those things. But if I go ahead and bake these now, while that bakes, this should fix this issue here. So that issue, it's being caused by that effect. That's the reason why I turned that on. All right, so let's go ahead and do the knees next. These are going to be a big reduction point. I can already tell we can just come in here and ixnay most of these edges here. So we can just do an edit mesh, delete edge and vertex on those center ones. We don't really need to maintain the volume. And then on the interior here, I can just target weld these to a center point, which will help as well. And I may even be able to take that center point and just smash it down to a base. I don't think I need to remove any roundness, so I'll leave those be. And then we'll get into the torso, which we actually have not touched yet, which is pretty crazy thinking about it. Okay, so the torso is going to be a pretty challenging one due to the hands. Most of the hands are good to go because of functionality, but there are small things we can get rid of. For example, these end tips, there's a good chance we don't need to maintain these in terms of volume from a distance. So we can delete edge and vertex on those. Those are going to be the main ones that I think we can get rid of. The rest of the things in the hand here, for the most part, are actually dealing with deformation in terms of bending and being able to distort. So we do want to keep those. I could potentially run a simplification here, and you can see since we set this up this way, this will actually be doable, where I could edit mesh and collapse these, which is very nice to just kind of reduce that to a singular ring. And later on, I can probably do that one more time. Then coming out of here, there's a good chance we can reduce pretty much all of these on the handle. You can see I have these points of reduction here going into the torso. I can, at this point, double-click these and just run across and collapse them. And what's kind of funny is since they had that partner there, we should have a relatively even result. And then we could decide if we need to do any reduction in the hand itself, or if we can do any reduction in the hand itself, rather. And you might want to collapse these one at a time. It should be just about every other one of these, though. So we can go ahead and do a collapse on that. And that should be okay for the hand in terms of adding some reduction. We could continue this out in any area that it seems appropriate to. And at this point, I'm just hitting G and collapsing where I see fits. I'll kind of keep that there. There's a good chance this one can be collapsed all the way down to the finger. Just doesn't have that much information. I am noticing, though, I am not seeing a UV seam on here, so that must be the side we welded the hand together on. This can be pretty much taken down to the finger, same with this one here. Some of our fingers are already triangulated, though, so I don't want to add double triangulation there if I can avoid it. So you can see I'm still leaving a little bit of a buffer here between these zones. And then here's a good example of where target weld is required because my seam's down there. And this is an example of where having my seam up here may have been better. I'm going to go ahead and keep the volume just to kind of show you. You can potentially do this, but notice how it stretches things. So at this distance, I'm going to leave that be. And sometimes you want to reduce it, but yeah, your brain says, nope, you don't get to. Here, I can decide if I need this. I probably don't need this or this in terms of edges on the arm. The arm is one of those areas where, once again, I've already kind of optimized. So at this level, I don't think we need to adjust this. This area, though, we could probably bring down a bit. So we could probably collapse this into here to make it so we don't have extra stuff there. And then I would even argue going across the chest here, I think my shoulder is necessary, but I think here to here could probably be collapsed without distorting the texture or form too much, and same with here to here, and this should still allow for the same functionality. So we could perform a reduction across there. One of our big saving areas is going to be the neck into the head here, so I'll just kind of get this one rolling already. I'll select this center line here and reduce that. We might even be able to reduce these. You can see I'm using the collapse for this because I want to grab two at a time. This character does not have a normal head, which is something I did intentionally. This allows us to really kind of aggressively reduce in here where possible, which is nice. So something like that, even along here, you know, I can start to reduce quite a bit. And just need to make sure it interacts correctly with the helmet still. And if it does, you know, we got no issues. All right, so back area here, I'll just kind of continue collapsing these. And in the back area here. I want to keep the neck intact because that's going to be an area that potentially is going to move. But something like that should do an okay job reducing that upper torso. Then as we come down in here, I probably don't need the center line, so we can delete the edge on that for the belt area. This I want to maintain for functionality. This I probably want to maintain for functionality. So it'll be kind of a matter of coming down here and collapsing these just like we did for the head And we can actually use our torso lines as kind of lead lines for that. On the back side, that's probably the only one I get to do. On the front side, I don't know if I get to do any. So maybe something like that. I could experiment with these on the side, collapsing these down like so, and just see if that affected the volume. And I don't think it did. So that was pretty aggressive. I think, we can probably call that good for this pass. We're at, 4K, which is a lot lower. We managed to reduce it by almost 3,000. We're just shy of our target goal, so I could continue kind of exploring to see if I can't figure out other ways to do this. Obviously, something like this is a small way that might help incorporate a little bit, but I think, I'm pretty happy overall with this. One area I'm noticing we can reduce down is this ring on the hand here. I could go ahead and grab these and collapse them. So let's go ahead and do an edit mesh collapse. And we'll call that good for our initial LOD pass. I think we hit every part of the body, and, it's okay. Horns, actually, I can do a little bit more on. And as you move through this, you'll start to notice more and more areas where you can make these adjustments on. But something like that, and here I can do a collapse on. And we'll do an edit mesh collapse there. Oops. Got to be careful with your selections. Somewhere here I selected the wrong area. So I'll just do these one at a time, so that way I'm not selecting too many things. It likes to select across sometimes, like what you saw there. And you'll notice I turn the textures on and off every now and then. Just kind of depends on if it's easy to see or not. Visibility is kind of a huge factor, so being able to see what you're doing definitely is important. All right, I feel like we're losing something there on these, so maybe I'll leave that one alone for now, and we'll just call that good for this LOD. So I'll go ahead and delete the history here on this one, and we'll call that our first LOD. And if we go ahead and turn on our other one here, and set these next to each other, just kind of moving them off to the side, we can see the difference there. And from this distance, you'll notice there isn't really a distance. There's a good chance we could have already, done an optimization pass on this. It's one of the things I didn't really do, is do kind of like a game pass, like I mentioned. I should have, but you can kind of get an idea from this how you might approach that. All right, so that's going to be the first LOD. The next one, what I would do is I just go ahead and duplicate the one I just made, Control-D, and basically set a similar goal of kind of cutting this in half. This one's going to be from even further away, so you can go really aggressive here. And this is when some of those early techniques that I mentioned kind of come in handy. For example, on the axe here, I'm just going to take these blades. We're going to go ahead and do an edit mesh collapse on these. So that way we can reduce these here and get them to stand out a bit more. I'll do the same thing here and here. And I'm going to turn off symmetry for this just in case it's accidentally grabbing something off screen. But I could potentially do it here. This is where things get kind of iffy, because if I do a collapse here, it might change the volume of that. But I actually think that's just fine. So we can do that. When it comes to this area here, what's kind of interesting is I don't know if we even need this center line to this axe, so I could consider doing a delete edge and vertex on that. I think we might still want it, though, as a bare minimum result, so I think I'll leave that be. But for areas like this, we can go into basically a cube. So these edges here, I could do an edit mesh, delete edge, and vertex on, because we don't need those anymore. And then same with running down into here. I do have to be mindful of any areas that turn into quads, or n-gons, I mean. Quads are fine, n-gons not so much. And you'll see some of that stuff happening here. As a quick solution, we could just come in here and do a mesh triangulate on these faces. So that way it kind of resolves these where we would want them to go. And I don't have to use my brain to be like, hey, how do we turn these to be not n-gons? So I'll do the same thing up here, just kind of select these various edges, do an edit mesh, delete edge and vertex. Sometimes your changes will make these floating vertices, so we'll need to come in and weld these so they have a home. Sometimes you run into weird issues like that, where those distort, but I'm okay. We can kind of solve that for that later if we need to. Let me go ahead and target weld here to make sure this stays a cube, and just make sure this is also a cube. Yeah, and we could come in now and triangulate these. So we could do a mesh triangulate, and get that set up. All right, so something like that will take care of the axe and get us a much lower result. I still think we could probably figure out some way to reduce those top areas. I feel like we still need those edges, though, so I guess not. Guess we're stuck with that, but hey, there we go. Axe. Now, to show you how we can manually retopologize some of these areas, like the head here, I don't need this to move, so if you double-click this in face mode, you can actually come in here and do a mesh reduce, and you can pick your reduction here and set your settings here. So just like I did before, I'll crank up UV borders and hard edges, and we can turn off the rest, honestly. And you could utilize this to reduce this as a selection, which is kind of nice. So if I go ahead and hit apply here, you'll see it will reduce that by 50%. And from a distance that this is at, that should be perfectly fine. I could do the same thing for areas like the shoulders that don't need to deform, things like the kneecap that don't need to deform. All of that could be okay. Now, I'm not going to do it on the kneecaps because it really screwed things up there, but I might go ahead and leave it on the shoulders just because why not? We could even potentially do it on the body here, but we do need those areas to deform still, so I'm not going to. I'd want to do a manual pass. When it comes to the kneecaps, these are so far away, we can start to just kind of come in the pinwheel here and just delete every other one. Let me go ahead and turn object symmetry back on here to world X, so we have that. And we can delete edge and vertex there. And then any area here we need to fix, we can fix. So something like that should be okay for the knees from a distance. And you can see how this kind of sets the tone of how this is going to look from a distance. With things like the arms, legs, these are all areas that we can essentially reduce down to cubes if possible. So that's something to kind of be mindful of at this stage. They don't have to be looking very good. So I'm going to start with my target weld here and just kind of aggressively weld these in edge mode here. That crotch area I might want to be mindful of. I don't really want to lose the volume there, so I will kind of keep that in place. But in terms of the central volume of this, the cube is going to describe the outer forms, which is the main volume we need front, side, and back from a very far away distance, even on something like a character. So being super aggressive like this is okay. And like I mentioned, the main thing we're looking for is just functionality. Here, what's kind of interesting is I can actually weld these down too. It feels weird doing something like this, but this ledge is not seen from a distance, and the normal map will carry it. And same with this ledge here on the separation of the boots. So these extreme far away ones, they're kind of fun. I'd probably want to keep this here for the knee, so I will. These can go up. Don't need these anymore. And then we can proceed to continue kind of cubing our foot here. Welding these over to their respective areas. Like I mentioned, I kind of want to keep the connection to the pant if possible, which in this case we don't need to worry about. And then I'll go ahead and do the interior here. And remember, this is when this thing's going to be super small on screen. It was like that comparison of the cube to the sphere. Some of these are necessary for bending, so I might want to keep some of these in here, and the rounded shape here, you know, I'll probably keep that in. I don't think I need the central one here for volume, ironically, so I can probably get rid of that. Other things that can be useful is the ability to spin edges. So, for example, this edge here, I do kind of like that, but the volume we're getting there is kind of nicer. So if we come under the edit mesh here, you can spin edges backwards or forwards. And sometimes this is helpful to kind of play with volume. In that case, I think that's okay. I'm trying to think of where this was neighboring originally. I do kind of like the volume that's giving us, but I'm not going to worry about it. There's something I probably made a mistake on there, but we're just going to call that okay. I could use the spin edge in the areas like this if I wanted to, so you can see how we could use that to add volume, but I think something like that's okay. Very large reduction pass on those feet. This area here I might just get rid of. I think it's making it look a little bit weird. And, you know, from a distance, we don't see any of that. That's exactly our goal. These areas here I might consider also kind of welding in and just pointing the toe. And And that will give us enough bend in the foot, but enough reduction. So you can see how ridiculous that is now. And then in the torso and the body here, this is where we're going to make those aggressive gains. And in this case, we're going to use something like the target weld here to just quad out the arm. And I'm looking for the main volumes of the arm here. And this will go down into the body as well. So you'll start to see us distorting this quite a bit. Now, this is also where your textures are going to start to get horrendous. In terms of solutions here, usually these are fine. You're going to know just all sorts of crazy artifacts, and it's gonna really kind of get to you. And what I want to tell you is it's okay. Believe it or not. Kind of weird, but yeah, it's okay. I'm going to get rid of the ability for the elbow to bend there, which sounds weird, but from a distance, you really only need it to bend across a single vertice. And this final line here just needs to find a friend, so we'll get that and give them a friend to weld to. I might weld this one over, though, and have this over and under, so that way I can reduce it more logically here. Shoulder we don't need anymore. And then coming into here, you can see areas like this. They're ripe for the collapsing, so I'll go ahead and just run them all the way up and over, because why not, and just run a collapse on that, so that way we have the reduction there. And then, just like we did before, we can continue the processing with the hand here, just like we had a moment ago. This might be another instance where, we opt for the collapse rather than the weld, so I might do a collapse, just kind of running around here to each of these that were coming off of the hand. So we can kind of cube this, and then proceed to do the same thing, kind of running into here. And now when it comes to the fingers at this distance, you really don't need much detail. So I can ixnay this line, for example, and then each of these individual lines that were once important at this distance are no longer. So as far as the hand goes, we can come in here and we can start to collapse these. And really just do bare minimum for the fingers. At this point, you can also turn your fingers into cubes or triangles as well, depending on the level of detail necessary for your game. I'll go ahead and just delete these second ones that these are going to fold on. And as a matter of fact, on the second LOD, we probably didn't even need these, if I'm going to be honest. It probably would be fine to just have them be lines. But that will go ahead and give these lines. And then, like I mentioned, we can actually come into these lines here that are running across here and basically just delete these if we want to. Delete edge and vertex. Get rid of the little tip. Something like that is going to be fine from a distance. And then even these gutters here, you can do like an edit mesh collapse on and really get this close to what we had for like our blockout geometry. Surprisingly, it's going to look very similar to that. I might just go ahead and do that here on these ones already, and then just clear out these ones' edges like we did a moment ago. And you might notice some of these are maybe essential edges, so I am going to need to come in and resolve them correctly, but we can tackle that as we go. So something like that. You'll see here we're getting kind of an n-gon across these. I'll just weld this down to its respective area. And as long as this has some semblance of functionality, that's really all that matters. At the distance we're seeing it currently, it is very, very small. So I'm not worried about that. And I'll just come in here and continue welding this. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I just wanted to show you the base idea of LODs here so you understand the process. You understand how to automate them, how to manually create them if you want to, and basically what to look for, when you're doing them, maintaining the correct edges and thinking of viewing it at a distance. I think that's one of the biggest things to kind of remember, what distance is this going to be seen at, because that's going to dictate what you can and can't do, what details are or are not needed, so on and so forth. It's also a fun exercise because it gives you an idea of just how well some of these things can hold up with some of the strangest topology. We're always going on and on about good topology in games, and then you watch an LOD mesh deform perfectly and just kind of put your game mesh to shame, and you question everything. All right, so I do want to continue this down into the torso. Basically, anywhere I see this possible, I'll just come in here and try and do a collapse. I need to maintain the belt buckle, but something I want to show you that's kind of wild is we don't even need the depth on this anymore, because from a distance, you're not going to notice that. That you probably will notice, so I may have to go the other way, down instead of forward. Or I can show you another weird trick. If you use vertex snapping and a merge, sometimes that saves your UVs, as weird as it sounds. There's a little bit of distortion there, but that's fine. If I did a merge, though, you'll see that will merge those, so they're all one, and they don't have an issue. At least it should. I must have snapped those to the wrong location. Okay, so that should be fine. So let me try the merge there. Yeah, see those merge down just fine, which is pretty cool. I may not even need this volume here, so this might be another area where I consider doing that for. Simply because of how this kind of comes out, I'm not 100% sure if I'd want to do that, because we kind of do need to keep that line looking like a line. So I might just chill on that and leave that volume there. You don't always have to go ridiculously optimized, but we can, and that's all that matters, is knowing we can. We no longer need these ledges here either on these, and we probably didn't at the last LOD, so I might want to go back to it as well and remove those, but we can flatten these all out. And the same goes for the arm here. If you don't have a UV cut on these as well, you could just save yourself some time by basically selecting one and delete edge and vertex to clear it. And I'll go ahead and do the same thing here heading into the arm. We don't need that. From a distance, you can't see any of it, which is weird. Like I said, you got to get kind of comfortable doing some really weird stuff with your geometry when it comes to LODs. We don't need this baseline here anymore, so I'm going to weld that down. And then in the interior here, the main thing is to try and make it match the exterior if possible. So I can go ahead and just kind of reduce these down too. We don't need that interior line. And then a lot of these we're not going to need either. But I think I'll leave them there to just kind of save myself some time in this demo. Since we're not going to see them, they're not going to impact the surface. We really don't need them at all. Which brings up an interesting thing. If you wanted to, you can also delete faces from LODs. Since it's its own geometry, nothing says you can't. So this is pretty aggressive on the backside here. Basically turning the body into a cube. But like I mentioned, from this distance, that's fine. It's something we would kind of expect. So just be mindful of that. All right. And then I'll keep those center ones because they seem necessary. Here, what's kind of funny is that's a little bit crooked. I probably wouldn't really want that. I'd want those to be straightened out. You can use things like a slide edge, too. If we do a mesh tool slide edge here, you can nudge things into place. The other thing you can do is you could use your move tool with UV preservation on, so you preserve things. But let's go ahead and kind of leave it at this for now. And call that good for this LOD here. You can probably continue reducing this. You'll notice this is like 1,728, so it's a lot lower. But that'll get our LOD set up. So the last thing I want to do is just kind of check these, make sure they're not completely horrendous and we didn't blow everything up. And we can do that in Unity. So I'm just going to put these in a group and just call this hero. And we can do an export and we can set this up in Unity real quick to check these. So let's go ahead and delete the history kind of across the board here. I'll just edit, delete all by type history, do a quick save. And then with the game exporter now, with this all set up, we can do a game exporter. So we can go to File, Game Exporter here. This is already set up for a fixed test 02. I can go ahead and just export that over the top. And since I have that set up in Unity already, I can go ahead and delete that, fixed test 02 right here, out of here, and just drag and drop in the new one, and it should have the LODs mapped. Make sure we click delete, and when we drop in the new one, it should have the LODs mapped. So let me go ahead and find that one real quick, It's going to be under my tutorial game character folder here, source images, hero, texturing, exports, and it should be under fixed test here and fixed test 02. And I'll go ahead and drag and drop this into here. And what's cool is since we use the proper LOD setup here, this should already have them set up. So you'll notice this LOD group here, we have it all set. Let me go ahead and make sure that it has the materials assigned real quick here. You can come under materials and we can just assign these. So this is my blend 4, we'll hit apply. That will make sure it has everything set up correctly, and my blend 3. Notice it did attach the textures. That's because I am using a blend instead of Maya's built-in fancy one. So just kind of a heads up there. Sometimes it is better to use those anyway. All right, so as I move out here, you can see this camera slides, and what's going to happen is the next LOD is going to pop in, then the next one, and then finally we're going to have the character completely removed. But what we should be able to see is as we slide here, there's no point where we notice those LODs swap in, and that's how we can tell we had a successful result on the LODs. All right, so you can see as I'm moving, there's never a point there where it looks like a new mesh is swapped in. That means we did an excellent job with our manual reduction, and we can pat ourselves on the back, and we can call that good for our LODs. Okay, so that's kind of the final thing that we needed to do to get this ready to rig and go into a game, is get some LODs set up. So now this guy has LODs, it has light maps, it has the ability to go into a game. Now, just to kind of show you though, the LODs in action here, let me go ahead and make them so they don't need to go as far to change. And if I do this now, we should see them popping into place. So you'll see from here to there, that's the change between my final level, so my final reduction. Here to here is the change between my second one. So you can see those changes are occurring, but with the natural spacing we had here in Unity, that was not a problem, which is very nice and allows us to kind of optimize these as well and, check the setup. Okay, so that's going to be setting up our LODs manually for our character. At this point, if you have gotten to this stage, pat yourself on the back. You might want to take a bit more time than I did with mine. There's definitely quite a few errors. What I'm going to do next is just kind of clean up some of the texture issues, and then we'll go ahead and start the rigging process. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can catch the next video in the series when it goes live.